On a beautiful run through the park on a pleasant day, you can easily get lost.
No! She didn't kill him.
Huh? In your true crime podcast.
It was the pool guy. So obvious.
Whatever motivates you works for us. It's all about letting your run be your run. And Brooks is here for every runner, doing the research and sweating the details to create gear that works for you. It's your run. Brooks, run happy.
Blue Wire.
First pick in the 1991 NBA draft, the Charlotte Hornets select Larry Johnson from University.
I'm not supposed to be here, man. A lot of people from where I'm from, don't make it.
Charlotte, we're back.
Welcome to another edition of Buzz Beat. This is Richie, and we hopped on Twitter Spaces following the first preseason game against the Boston Celtics. Lee, Brian, and myself recapped the game, went over the highs and the lows, tried not to overreact and tried not to sugarcoat some of the things that went poorly. But we did do this live, and if you guys wanted to join us more frequently for these Twitter Spaces episodes, make sure you guys are following the podcast at BuzzBeatPod on Twitter. You guys will get notifications the minute we do go live. We're going to try to do more of these post-game pods on Twitter. Field your questions. We really like the participation from the speakers. We did get a speaker request, but we're trying to aim for more participation from you guys. But for you guys to do that, you have to be with us live. So this is our conversation after the game on Twitter Spaces. I will say that if you're not there live, you do get a little bit of an abridged version. So this conversation was cut down a little bit, but overall, we did a good job of breaking down the loss to the Boston Celtics. So let's go ahead and get into it. All right. Thanks again for tuning in to another Buzz Beat, a Charlotte Hornets podcast. This is Richie, and we are live here on Twitter Spaces. We're going to start calling these episodes that we do on Twitter Spaces Buzzins. This is our first post-game buzzin, albeit a preseason one and a bad loss, 134-93 to the Boston Celtics. I'm joined by Lee and Brian today. I hope you guys are doing well. Lee, we're watching some preseason basketball on a football Sunday.
Yeah. I was telling you guys off air that a couple of my buddies were just completely flabbergasted that I was tweeting Hornets preseason basketball during a prime NFL. But I had Red Zone on the background. Come on. I mean, we can multitask in this day and age. So
exactly.
Great Sunday afternoon way to kick off. A 40-point loss. You gotta love it.
How's it going over there, BG?
Doing pretty well, and today felt like we can discuss it, but today did feel like a sign of things to come. But I'm doing pretty well. I was on the road a little bit recently. Last weekend, was out in Denver, Colorado for a wedding, and we actually ran into a BuzzBeat listener at a bar out there one night.
Wow!
We wanted to yell about why the Hornets are in the situation they're in right now. So that was cool. But anyways, good to be on with you guys. Good to have the Hornets back. And just one preseason game against a good opponent. I think Boston looked awesome and pretty rough showing today from Charlotte.
Yeah, I think they made the NBA Finals last year. So they are a pretty decent team. So I think we're just going to jump into this. We are doing this on Spaces, so if we have time for it, we'll leave some room for some speaker requests as well. But I just wanted to give my quick thoughts on the game, and then we can kind of get a little bit deeper as the conversation goes along. But one thing that I was just very interested in was the pace of play with Clifford. He's so used to getting his defense set up, getting his players back, that also bleeds over to the offensive end. And we saw that in his first stint here in Charlotte, that he was a very methodical coach, slowing things down. But that wasn't the case today. He let the team play to their strengths, push the pace, be a little frenetic at times. And for this team to be quote unquote successful and more watchable this season, I think Clifford needs to let this be a part of their DNA. And half-court offense will be a struggle. It's going to be inconsistent this season with the lack of on-the-ball playmakers, outside of LaMelo Ball. So to get the team in the spots where they need to create advantages, they're probably going to have to do it through a lot of transition offense. Now, having said that, knowing Clifford and what he requires of the team on the defensive side of the court, he may have to go deeper into his bench and play more players in his rotation because he expects so much effort and, defensive intensity on that end. So that's what I was looking for today as well. And I thought for the most part, we saw a little bit more effort and energy on defense, despite giving up a ton of three-point shots. Because I don't think all those three-point shots were necessarily, of a breakdown on defense. It was just, Jaylen Brown, Tatum, these players just hitting shots that some of them were just tough. So I will say this, if the Hornets decide to keep pushing the pace, obviously they're going to have to get back on defense as well, and Clifford's going to expect a lot out of them on defense. I did see them use drop coverage a couple times with Plumlee. I think it's important for Oubre or whoever that point of attack defender is fights through that screen so that the bigs aren't having to cover two areas at once for that long of time, because there was a play in the first half where LaMelo had to come off the corner shooter to help that out, and Clifford, his first time around, three-point defense was an issue. So also, too, I will say this. I turned up the volume, but I feel like Clifford was very active, and he was yelling out directives on the sidelines, which is good to hear. So, Lee, I know there's other stuff that we can get into and plenty of sloppy play with preseason, but what were your initial thoughts, and what were you looking for out of game one of the preseason?
Yeah, well, I tweeted prior to the game, and these are two more macro conversations that I'm not going to dive too deep in just yet. But obviously, what is Clifford going to do? How is he going to negotiate the minutes as of offensive caretaking when LaMelo Ball's on the bench? And of course, also, what is the center rotation going to look like? But other than that, I think which certainly we're going to dive into. But other than that, I do think it's we just got beat by 41 points. The Celtics knocked in everything they shot. I mean, they shot 57% from the floor, 46% from three, 80% from the free throw line. So, Boston is a very, very good basketball team, even without Robert Williams, who they didn't have tonight, who is a guy that gives us fits. But Jaylen Brown looked incredible. Tatum looked awesome. Grant Williams was awesome. Pritchard had everybody for Boston contributed tonight. Malcolm Brogdon, I thought, looked pretty healthy and was moving pretty well, which is a good sign for Celtics fans. Hornets didn't have Martin and Hayward, who are two of the most important players in this rotation, particularly when you're playing a team with Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. Oubre started at the three. BG already fired off a couple hilarious tweets about Tsunami Poppy's defense in midseason form, as he said on Twitter. And so when you factor all those things in, first game for Steve Clifford, no Martin, no Hayward, playing a Boston team that is just incredibly in sync and moves the ball around, pops it around like maniacs and bangs in all kinds of shots. Then it's not exactly an excuse, or it's not exactly comforting, but that is important context, I think. And then, I think we'll get into some of the bright spots. There were some bright spots tonight, particularly Jalen McDaniels, who I'm sure we'll hit on as well. So those are kind of my general overview thoughts without getting into more of the particulars that I hope we could talk about as well.
Yeah, I would first off and just say I agree with Lee. I thought Boston, they looked great. They looked in sync. They looked like they had a good rhythm. I know it's been a couple of last few weeks have been tough for them as an organization, not just the stuff with Ime Udoka, but also being dealt the Rob Williams news. And it might be the middle of the season, hopefully, before they get that guy back, and fingers crossed that he's healthy, because he's such an impactful and fun defensive player and worker on the offensive glass. No Gallinari, obviously. Does feel like Sam Hauser can at least give them some of that spacing and shooting to help make up for the loss of Gallo, and Hauser played pretty well today, shot it really well. There were a couple of breakdowns from the Hornets defensively that allowed him to get, really just wide open spot up threes or pick and pop threes. If Spencer were here, I think he would want us to do a little wahoo wah. So good for the Cavs and or UVA fans, and good for Sam Hauser. Back to the Hornets though. It's just one preseason game. There's almost no reason to pull that much from it. I feel like anything you're going to pull from a preseason game, it's just going to be laced with like confirmation bias, and also this is not a regular season NBA game, and it's the first one. So you want to take everything with a grain of salt. Everything comes with those caveats, obviously. And the Hornets are on the road, and they're missing Hayward and Martin, and Hayward is hands down the number 2, playmaker and creator on this roster behind LaMelo Ball. There's a big gap between 1 and 2, but there's probably a pretty big gap between 2 and 3 as the roster is currently constituted. So to not have him, to not have Cody Martin, obviously not good. But this game did highlight, I think, a lot of concerns that I have about the Hornets half-court offense. Richie, you started this by talking about Clifford and the pace. And look, I think ultimately when you have a player like LaMelo, this one-of-a-kind player, hit-ahead passer, guy who really likes to get it and go, can grab a rebound and push the pace instantly, only needs guys to run with him, can just grab a long rebound and start running with it. So I do think the pace is going to be there, and I think at times it's going to have to be there because I just don't see how this team is going to become a reliable half-court offense, save for they get 65, 75 games out of Gordon Hayward, and he's playing at a high level. Maybe if you get a big time jump from someone like PJ Washington, who struggled shooting the ball today, thought he had some nice moments defensively, but unless you get really sort of like outlier growth from someone like he or Book Knight, who, by the way, this is not a good James Book Knight game today. 1 of 9 from the field, 0 of 4 from deep. He couldn't get by Sam Hauser. He couldn't get by Peyton Pritchard. Pretty concerning in that regard. Early on in the game, I liked some of the actions that Charlotte ran to try to get Terry going off the basketball. That they started the game with a little pistol set into a throwback action for Rozier. Boston covered it up. And their switching and their help really took away a lot of stuff the Hornets were trying to do in the half court. So, again, that's sort of part of the problem too. But I just think even against defenses that aren't elite like Boston, and this may be the best defense in the world, it was a year ago, I just think you're going to have nights like this where the shots are going to, in the half court, are going to be really, really tough. Nothing came easy tonight at the rim. It felt like they didn't get an easy look at the rim in half court until the second half. So all in all, I think I would say pretty disappointing offensive showing from the Hornets. Defensively, they couldn't keep the ball in front, and Boston's got the power on the wing and in the backcourt to get north-south. Could also see early on defensively, Jaylen Brown bullies LaMelo Ball for a slash and a dunk. Terry Rozier getting beat off the dribble. Terry Rozier defensive breakdowns as usual. Kelly Oubre, all of his defense tonight was it was abysmal, man. Like, I don't know what else to say. Look, it's one thing if you can't keep Jason Tatum in front of you. That's really, really hard to do. But at least three times in this game, Oubre off-ball defense getting cooked by simple either split action or a flare screen from the Celtics, wide open threes off the catch. I don't know, not a ton of positives to take. It's certainly on the offensive side of the floor for the Hornets.
Every deep playoff run starts with building an amazing team. Doing the same for your business doesn't take a room full of scouts. You just need Indeed. Don't spend hours on multiple job sites looking for candidates with the right skills when you can do it all with Indeed. Hate waiting? Indeed's US data shows over 80% of Indeed employers find quality candidates whose resumes on Indeed matches their job description the moment they sponsor a job. Something I love about Indeed is that it makes hiring all in one place so easy because with virtual interviews, Indeed saves you time. You can message, schedule, and interview top talent all in one place. Indeed knows that when you're growing your business, you have to make every dollar count. That's why when you sponsor a job, you only pay for quality applications from resumes in our database matching your job description. Visit Indeed.com/Blue Wire to start hiring today. Just go to Indeed.com/Blue Wire. That's Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Terms and conditions apply. Cost per application pricing not available for everyone. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
Champions aren't born, they're made. And the secret to make your business reign supreme? Shopify, the all-in-one commerce platform to start, run, and grow your business. Forget the off-season work. Shopify makes it simple to sell to anyone from anywhere. Whether you're selling warm-ups or wall hangers, it's time to start selling with Shopify and join the platform simplifying commerce for millions of businesses worldwide. With Shopify, you'll customize your online store to your brand, discover new customers, and build the relationships that create die-hard fans. Shopify fields all the sales channels to grow a winning business, from an in-person POS system to an all-in-one e-commerce platform, even across social media platforms like TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram. Shopify is the secret to becoming a business champion by making it simple for anyone to sell their products anywhere, taking the guesswork out of selling. When you're ready to take your winning idea to the world, team up with Shopify, the commerce platform powering millions of businesses down the street and around the globe. Sign up for a free trial at shopify.com/Blue Wire, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/Blue Wire to start selling online today. Shopify.com/Blue Wire.
Yeah, let's try to get into some positives or some noteworthy things before we get into the discussion about the backup point guard, which you guys were both alluding to, and maybe the backup center position as well. I don't know if Ball was necessarily a bright spot per se, because his shooting was a little bit off. Maybe not so much in the second half, but the first half definitely. But there were definitely some good things with him. I do think he needs to slow down at times. You know, obviously he's a guy that just relishes pushing the ball up the court at any time, but sometimes he can get too frantic with it. But I thought the pull-up mid-range shot that he hit to open the game was something that I hope we see more from him moving forward. I know that Cliff talks about him getting to the rim as much as possible. Like, that's an area that he can improve upon. But I almost wonder if improving, the pull-up midi will be an easier task for him, because he just shies away from contact. He's such a finesse type of player when he gets around the rim, which is fine. Like, he'll hit some difficult shots, but I do wonder if that mid-range pull-up game could be something that he could kind of attack this season. And they're going to have to add some more versatility with him and his game, and just getting him to different spots. I know they used him a couple times off ball in today's game, out of the corner off some staggered screens. And, when he can get ahead of steam coming off those and turning the corner, it gives him the ability to kind of think on his feet quicker than the defenders. He can freelance a little bit. He can force those off-ball defenders to commit one way or the other. Defensively, for LaMelo, I think that's one area of improvement that we're going to want to see out of him. I thought he was a little bit more active and fighting through screens, but it's really hard to tell how much of Clifford will rub off on LaMelo for the extent of the 82-game season. And I keep going back to this, but I think that's going to be a challenge for Clifford, is balancing the energy on both ends of the court, because if they need to push the pace, they also need energy on the on the defensive side of the court as well. And then just two other players I would like to mention, I guess positive. PJ was fairly quiet, I would say, for the most part of the game. He didn't feel overly involved, especially in the first quarter. Just felt like he was not out there, but I thought his defensive intensity, as usual, was awesome, was visible. He had that one play in the first half where I think I highlighted it on Twitter, where he was denying Jaylen Brown in the corner. He cuts baseline. PJ might be a half step behind, but he's able to slide, recover, swivel his head, and get that steal. He does little things like that.
That was beautiful. Beautiful denial, off-ball defense from PJ.
Yeah, all the time he does stuff like that. And then Lee, you mentioned Jalen McDaniels, probably one of the few bright spots on this team. Although, it was in small doses. I think one thing with Jalen, and I mentioned this before, he's going to have to, I wouldn't say have to, but it would be nice if he could get a little bit better with the ball in his hands. And I think he showed a little bit of that last year. And then today he didn't really shy away from putting the ball down and attacking his opponent. So I think we'll see some of those small signs all year, and hopefully Jalen can kind of fill into that role with that 3-4 position, because there's going to be some minutes to be had at that position. So Lee, bright spots?
Yeah. I want to talk. I do want to talk about McDaniels for a second. You know, it was really interesting game, I thought, from him today. Like, he was primarily at the 3 today, more than I mean, last year his role was kind of as, you know, pretty much a backup 4, like, and particularly offensively, he was really just kind of like a space guy, you know? I mean, like you said, Richard, you'd see moments of him, you know, trying to kind of explore his creation a little bit, but you know, there was never really any type of like consistent production offensively for him in that way last year. You know, we've talked about his cutting on this podcast. We've talked about his, you know, uniqueness as a defensive player a ton on this podcast. But today, I mean, and you just look at the box score, like, McDaniels is a serviceable 3-point shooter, and he didn't take one tonight. Like, everything he had going tonight was like a little bit of dribble combination stuff off the move, or, you know, curling on a down screen and getting into the lane, attacking the closeout. I thought he looked pretty comfortable. I thought he had a kind of like elevated sense of confidence with the ball in his hands. And I know it's just one game, and I know it's just, 19 minutes tonight, but he was 5 for 7 on the floor. He had a couple finesse touch finishes, contested finishes off the glass around the basket tonight. He just seemed to be like more of a wing out there today than he had to me in the past offensively. And of course, he still gave you like great effort defensively. He was active and disruptive at times. So I guess the main point I'm trying to make is, like, I think that's something to watch, like seeing the position and the function and the role he has in this offense versus what he's been in the past. And I'm not necessarily like, I actually would have liked to see him take a couple threes tonight. He didn't. I think that needs to stay in his game, obviously. But I thought it was just like really encouraging to see him take and make some tough shots, create a little bit, have some kind of know-how, navigating some pin down screens and things of that nature. So that was by leaps and bounds, I think, probably the highlight of this game. I'd agree. Me.
Yeah, well said. I thought McDaniels just to tack on, aggressive on the glass as always. Some good activity on the offensive glass, and I clipped this and posted it to Twitter. Like, I thought one of the best plays they had, and by this point, you know, Boston had pulled their main guys, and finally we're getting some activity from Mark Williams, who doesn't come on until the third quarter. But I thought one of the best possessions Charlotte had tonight was, it's Dennis Smith Jr. is in at point guard. They run a simple ball screen to get him. What JT Thor screens for DSJ. Sam Hauser switches out onto Dennis Smith Jr. Kabengele, who played well for Boston tonight, and I thought really was incredibly physical against Mark Williams. But on this possession, he shows help early at the elbow nail area. And DSJ did a nice job sort of seeing, McDaniels, who's being defended by Kabengele, is open on the wing. You know, that's a spot where it could have been a catch and shoot for Jalen McDaniels, but instead he catches on the go and immediately gets downhill. And I thought it was like it was probably the cleanest paint touch that Charlotte had in the half court. He gets it to the front of the rim, helps, slides over, no look, drop pass, Mark Williams dunk. You know, look, again, part of that is Boston's got the third string in at that point. They're voluntarily putting themselves into a so-so switch with Hauser on DSJ, and Kabengele's never been much of a defender, so he's a little bit heavy-footed and out of position, but still nice job by McDaniels to get it and to be the guy that gets the ball from point A to point C, being the connector there, not just not just a guy that could grab and go in transition or play out of the corners, which we know he can do. Like those are the knowns with Jalen McDaniel. It's sort of the what else can he give you? And we've seen hints of the catch and go game. We've seen hints of the short roll game, but I think there were some encouraging signs. The aggression level and the mentality looked to be there offensively, which has to be, pretty darn encouraging. If I were to grab one other sort of positive from this, I don't think Steve Clifford was showing his entire hand by any stretch this game. I'd love to see sort of like more guard-to-guard actions, which were such a key component of the James Borrego playbook. You saw them get to some of these UCLA like empty corner pick and roll looks. I liked in the third, I think it was early third quarter when they took LaMelo off the ball a little bit and that put the ball in Rozier's hands, which is like I'm not the biggest fan of, but you got a couple of catch and shoot threes for LaMelo because of that. They then that one set they flowed into empty corner pick and roll with LaMelo and Richards. I believe they got a foul off, drew a foul off of that. So that kind of stuff is good. And I'd like to see even more of that going forward, especially in lineups that where you can get Hayward to be the secondary ball handler, and all of a sudden you can put LaMelo into some of these more like attack mode situations. And we'll see, like if the Dennis Smith Jr. and LaMelo backcourt is able to hit a little bit, then I think there's some kind of things you can do where you invert the responsibilities of those two guys and you let DSJ slash and you let LaMelo be the one that's like involved in actions. We know what he does shooting off the catch. We know what he can do as being a connector. And certainly you want the ball in LaMelo's hands as much as possible. It's just sometimes I think we can route that usage differently, or the possession can still end with LaMelo running pick and roll or empty corner pick and roll. But there's some stuff we can do to shift the defense around, to move the matchups around a little bit, then flow into that action. So I think there was some kind of encouraging stuff in a very limited sample in terms of like some of the ways I think we're going to see Terry Rozier and LaMelo Ball used this season.
And you mentioned DSJ, you mentioned LaMelo Ball. I do want to get into this backup point guard dilemma, but we do have a speaker request that I would like to get to before we have that conversation. So, Michael, you were on. What's your thoughts?
Okay, thank you. And for everyone that pretty much watched the game, can someone please explain the Nick Richards hype? Because I just don't understand. Like, what is the purpose of him being out there? He's still struggling finishing. I just don't understand what we still in like year 4 or 5 for him. Like, why is he still out there? That's my only question.
Well, it's funny. We were going to talk about the center rotation as well, so we might as well just talk about that now. I would agree. I tweeted mid-game, just wasn't seeing much of the hype. I know that Clifford has been in love with Nick Richards over the summer, and maybe he's making some strides behind the scenes that we just haven't seen. But he seems like the same old Nick Richards that we've always seen. Mark, with the rookie Mark Williams that we just drafted, what is Nick Richards able to do that is significantly head and shoulders above Mark? I'm not sure. I'm really not sure why Nick Richards is getting the nod over Williams, because Williams does a lot of the same things that Richards does. It's just a bouncier guy. Like, he can be a lob threat. He can. And you want to get him in there as soon as possible so that you can kind of develop him as much as possible. And with the way that this team season is going, you know that the playoffs are just not necessarily attainable. So play the young guys, play the young kids, and I think Mark Williams is hopefully going to overtake Nick Richards as that backup center position. But I would love to hear you guys' thoughts on that, BG and Lee.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about Richards a lot the last couple of years, and there was a podcast we recorded over the off season where I laid out my thoughts on Richards. Like, I don't think anyone in this pod thinks he's like terrible. I just think he's like center depth. Like, that's it. Like, he maxes out as like a backup 5. I think more realistically, he's sort of like your 5th or 6th big guy. Like, he's your 3rd center. Like, he's a guy that I think will play in the NBA for a while because he's big and strong enough and active enough. And I'm sure those are the kind, like stuff related to that are the things that Steve Clifford likes. And my guess would be like the stuff that he's doing better than Williams at this stage. I mean, maybe some of it's just being in like the right place a little bit more frequently defensively. Williams still having to figure out what depth to be at when he's dropping in the pick and roll versus certain guys coming off the ball screen looking to shoot. Williams, I think there was another time where he got stuck a little bit in no man's land on an empty side pin down that turned into a lob for Kabengele. But I think probably the main thing is just like might be like something like lower body strength for someone like Richards or Plumlee compared to Williams, because like as long and bouncy as Williams can be, and I think he's going to be a good pro for a long time. This was an issue at Duke too. Like, when he goes up for rebounds, like he can kind of, his center of gravity can kind of like get knocked off kilter a little bit. Do you know what I mean? Like you'll see him kind of like flailing and reaching for rebounds. Kabengele pushed him out of the paint one time on another offensive rebound opportunity for Boston. So I think that would be the main thing. I just think Williams is going to have to get stronger, improve the conditioning, and kind of just get his bearings in terms of positioning. I think he'll get there. I really do. And I think, hell, by the end of the year, I'm hoping that he's playing the majority of they're close to half or something like that of the center minutes. Of course, we didn't see Kai Jones until late in the game, like real late in the game. So where are we at with Kai Jones in terms of center rotation? And of course, no minutes for PJ Washington at the 5 tonight either. So there's some real stuff to iron out here, especially if Nick Richards is actually like just being gifted not gifted. That's unfair. But if
say it, Brian, just say it.
It's just like if he's going to receive this big a part of the rotation, a lot can change and I think a lot will change. But like it's gonna mess up the math elsewhere for bringing along some of the younger guys or getting to some of Charlotte's best lineups offensively. I.e. when PJ is playing small ball 5.
Yeah. So I'll just add a couple things because I think y'all hit it all pretty well. If you have been a listener of this pod, you will know that I have been. A soft Richards proponent. I don't think I've been unrealistic about it, but I have liked him as kind of a developmental depth center piece as BG laid out. Even with that context, even I was frustrated today. But what I will say is I think we can really chalk this up to like Steve Clifford, grizzled veteran coach that sees Nick Richards as a bit more of a professional at this point in his career. And that's all this is. I hope. I think that 10, 15 games into the season, I would like to think that Mark Williams has like completely overtaken Nick Richards as the backup center. And who, like, obviously this would be potentially a little optimistic, but like at some point, you would hope that Mark Williams can start as a center this year. Like, correct. Absolutely. So again, like as someone who's seen some bright spots in Nick Richards, he had some moments last year. I think he is rosterable. And I think that's about where it ends. I think you've got an injury early February and you're on the road and Nick Richards needs to play 15 minutes. Like that's not a disaster. If it's a once in a while type of thing, you don't want him playing 19 minutes a night like he did tonight. And BG hit on one of the biggest rotation points I wanted to make during this center chat. And that was zero minutes for PJ Washington at the 5 tonight. I've got 44 center minutes between Richards, Plumlee, and Williams. And then there was a little bit of kind of Kai Jones mixed in there. I think a little bit at the 4 and the 5. So I think my thought there is maybe, BG, that was a little bit of what you were alluding to when you said that Clifford didn't really show a whole lot of his hand tonight, because I have to assume that PJ at the 5 is still going to be a pretty big part of this rotation. and that Clifford just kind of knows what he has there. He knows that's been the most successful lineup for the Hornets. He knows he has it in the back pocket as his kind of ace in the whole lineup, and he doesn't necessarily need to trot it out there in the or preseason, and that he just wants to put the centers out there as much as possible to see what he has there. And then obviously once the season starts, you've got to think we'll see a bunch of PG at the 5.
Yeah, and that's also why the Hornets lost by 40. We're definitely going to trick them into thinking we're better than this, but no.
False sense of security, yeah.
I think where I'm going to be most frustrated with is if the Hornets are out of the playoff picture by January, February, and you're still seeing Richards minutes over Williams. Like, okay, give him the nod to start the season, but if things are going south in the way that I think that it will, I don't think there's much of a reason to have Richards playing. Now, the other conversation we need to have is the backup point guard position. Tonight, or I guess today, Rozier was primarily used as that backup point guard, if you want to call it that. DSJ didn't come in until late in the third quarter. The team was very listless, lethargic when Ball left the court, which I think almost anyone could have expected. There is just no penetration, no ball movement, no breaking down of the defense. And it's funny, like Clifford talked about the Hornets being one of the better teams and getting paint touches. You know, if they can't do that this year with that backup, rotation in the point guard position, it's going to be tough sledding for them. And some of their paint touches came way too late in the shot clock. And the defense, Boston's a great defensive team, but the defense wasn't having to work as much just because it felt like the primary ball handler wasn't able to create any kind of advantage. And I'm not saying that DSJ is the answer, guys. I do think, or I would love to see what he can do Wednesday. I think that's the next game, Wednesday, with maybe better talent around him as the backup point guard. He had garbage time tonight, which is, very hard to judge. It's even harder when it's preseason garbage time. So this issue definitely needs to be figured out sooner rather than later. And I don't think going into the season with a backup point guard by committee is going to be very beneficial. And obviously the options are limited, but they're going to have to figure out what they're doing. And this just seems to be an issue with Charlotte for the last handful of years, just not having a solidified backup point guard since like Jeremy Lin. And one thing too, Lee mentioned Book Knight earlier. I never expected him to be the backup point guard, but man, were his dribbles tonight just wasted. Like he was not making a lot of headway, like a lot of dribble moves, but it didn't really equate to anything. And when you add that on top of the, lack of backup point guard play, it just was not forcing the defense to work at all.
Yeah, I just don't think Book is like a talented, like young player. Like I don't think the handle nor the passing are there right now. And so that's why I've always been sort of skeptical of him being like the microwave guy that you just bring off the bench and have him prop up a second unit. I'd love to see it. I'm hopeful that you could get there. Richie, when you and I recorded last week, I said I think the hope has to be that this guy can be a person that can prop up and be a scorer, like an efficient scorer off the bench. But like Book Knight's strengths, like as a driver and a creator, is there's kind of like a funky offbeat nature to his game, right? Where you can see his creativity and his ability to sort of like attack guys one-on-one in the in-between spaces, in the in-between steps. And he just kind of right now needs space to be able to do that. And asking him to operate in tight windows or to just like drive around guys, it's tough. And that's even before we get to some of the issues he has finishing at the basket through contact. Like that was a huge concern of his last year. One game preseason sample did not look great tonight. And for me, man, it's just like I was thinking about this during the game today. Like it is a bummer that 2 seasons ago, the Hornets, here's what they had in terms of ball handlers. LaMelo Ball, Devontae Graham, Malik Monk, Gordon Hayward, Miles Bridges, then Terry Rozier. And like, man, I mean, LaMelo's still here and Terry is still here and Gordon is here half the time when he's healthy. But, like you let Malik Monk walk for nothing. You traded Devontae Graham ultimately that became the Mark Williams pick. So that's something, but you also shipped out your other first round pick from this past season. So you could save some money. And so you trade Jalen Duren, and all of a sudden it's like, yeah, you just, whether it was your fault or not, like you're all of a sudden you're out like all of these ball handlers that either gave you pull-up shooting and that gravity you could play off of, or they gave you guys that could touch the paint off of a live dribble, and you gave half of those guys are gone, and you got nothing in return from those transactions to help like replace some of that pick and roll primary ball handler creation. And it's a huge issue for this team right now.
I'll let you get to this in a second. I totally forgot about the Devontae Graham. I went all the way back to Jeremy Lin, back to 2016. But yeah. So Devontae Graham was a productive backup point guard. I do wonder. I mean, it wouldn't have changed everything, but I do wonder how Gordon Hayward and Cody Martin would have changed some things with some playmaking responsibilities tonight. So, Lee, go ahead and finish this off with the backup point guard dilemma.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's certainly the half glass full take, is like when Gordon Hayward out there, he is kind of your de facto quote unquote backup point guard in a way, because he just facilitates so much. He's such even the Boston commentators were like, this is a totally different team with Gordon Hayward on the floor. And they're right. Obviously the caveat to that is you only get that about 50 times a year, optimistically. So, yeah. I could probably go into some sort of like cold sweat talking about this backup point guard situation. I mean, you look at the resources that the Hornets have attempted to pour into this, void, and those resources are essentially, they took a shot at Grant Riller with like the 56th pick. They brought in Brad Wanamaker for half a season. They brought in Isaiah Thomas at the whatever the word that describes past the twilight of the career. Like what? Like is that like the early morning? Like it was going into the next day. Honestly, is what it was like. And then of course you had the Ish Smith, kind of half a season. And then, yes, they drafted Bryce McGowan's in this cycle, but he's a developmental prospect that I like a lot, but not someone that you can expect to contribute as like a facilitator and caretaker of NBA offense. So another thing is like, how much did we all talk about prior to last season, after, all those ball handlers that Brian just laid out? How much did we talk about like Mitch Kupchak and the front office are making their big bet? They are pushing all the chips in the LaMelo Ball playmaking basket. And that wasn't the wrong decision, I don't think. This became a top 10 offense after that offseason. And LaMelo Ball is an incredibly unique, amazing young player. But like, that didn't have to be mutually exclusive to not having a backup point guard. And this team just continually refuses to put any type of meaningful resources into that void. Brian, you hit on something again. Great minds think alike. We've got a ton of synergy on this podcast, clearly, because I had literally written down in my notes, we had a backup point guard named Devontae Graham. And I know it's not particularly prescriptive or helpful to like bring that back up because he's gone now and the Hornets made their decision. But my goodness, would it be nice to have him on this roster? Devontae Graham was a really good passer and a really good shooter, and he had tons of deficiencies. But the two things that we really need off the bench, he brought to the table. And so it's really frustrating because, and to be fair, obviously they did spend a lottery pick on James Bouknight. But again, he's just like, he wasn't coming into this league. Even the most optimistic proponents of James Bouknight would not have made the argument for him as a facilitator for others. That was not his positive qualities to draw on as a draft prospect. So, I think the problem here is, and Richie, you kind of alluded to this a little bit, it's like we have to figure out what the solution is, but The issue is I'm not sure there's a solution on the roster besides a very healthy Gordon Hayward that dissipates some of those issues.
Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking about all the past backup point guards that we've had in the past handful of years, but one of my favorite ones, I'm joking, obviously, is Julian Stone. I went to go look up to see what he was doing. Can you guys guess what country he's playing basketball in?
Turkey,
Lithuania,
Italy. So,
oh, okay, all right.
Where's Joe Chile?
Oh, yes.
Oh my God.
Is he still at Greensboro?
Yeah. There have been some. We even got a Jalen Crutcher sighting late in this game. Yeah, man. What's also kind of a bummer. I think as the season progresses, Devontae Graham's not even going to be in the Pelicans rotation. Maybe he will be to start the year, but I don't know, man. Jose Alvarado may have supplanted that guy as the franchise backup point guard. Yeah, it's just tough because it's man, Charlotte could really use that guy right now. As we said plenty of times last season too. And look, Ish gave them some moments, but ultimately you used him in a trade to get Montrezl Harrell, and that helped kind of. But then he walks in free agency. And so one of the ball handlers that you did use some resources to sign is now plays for a Western Conference playoff team now that he's in Denver. So I don't know what you do about that, because I just don't think there are a ton of answers on the roster, save for, like Lee mentioned, having Hayward be just abnormally healthy and productive this season on the court. I do think too, the possessions where I tweeted about this during the game, but when Rozier is playing the one, and LaMelo's on the bench, the half court set cannot just be space the floor, pick and roll. It just that the first possession of Rozier at one, the Hornets did that and Boston switched and it was okay, cool. Now what? It was no surprise. And the possession resulted in a end of the shot clock 3 that missed. Those possessions, if Rozier's playing one, then you've really got to dial up the scheme. It's just got you've got to be running. You just got to be heavy on actions in those situations, I think. So it's cool to talk about how they touched the paint and got to the rim a lot last season, but there's a pretty big piece of that puzzle that is missing this season. Yes, I just don't know how there's just no way to simulate that or reproduce it unless you just get development from Book Night. Doesn't look like that's quite there yet. You scheme it up. Maybe that's a solution, or you get really, really good production from Gordon Hayward. But I don't know. I don't want to overreact too much to one preseason game. Richie, you mentioned they play again in a couple of days. Hopefully it looks a little bit better as things progress.
Yeah, they play the Pacers on Wednesday, and then they get a rematch against the Celtics on Friday. So those are the first 3 games of the 5-game slate in preseason, and then the opener is on October 19th. Luckily, that's a day after my wife's birthday. If it was on my wife's birthday, I'm not sure I'd be able to watch it. So
yeah, you can't do that, man. You can't. Not on the
could
birthday.
Not do that. No, but I appreciate everyone for joining us live. If you guys join late, there will be a podcast version. If you want it ad free, if you want it early, consider checking out the link in the episode notes about our private BuzzBeat Plus feed to enjoy those perks. For Lee, for Brian, I'm Richie. We'll talk to you guys later.